Somewhere between raising my daughter, caring for my mother, stretching a salary that was never enough, and learning the complicated world of politics, I'd started becoming a woman I didn't recognize yet. I was still surviving, but for the first time, I was also beginning to build a life. 3 years! Can you believe it? I thought about it as I watched my baby girl walk into the basic school classroom. Tears threatened to spill onto my cheeks, and every part of me wanted to grab her up, hold her close, and shield her from anything that might ever hurt her. Instead, I stood there watching her struggle with her lunchbox that looked far too heavy for her tiny body. A little smile played across my lips as I remembered how she had insisted on carrying her own school backpack and lunch pan. My baby was so independent. She had been fully potty trained by the time she was a year old and was already reading books at 3. I'd promised myself that, as long as I was alive, my baby would never have to go without anything she needed. She was such a mild mannered baby that people would sometimes ask if she was even at home because she hardly ever cried. I remember praying when I was pregnant with her that God would bless me with a baby who wouldn't cry too much and who would look like a beautiful little doll. And she was a perfect answer to my prayers. She sucked her two middle fingers, and because she rarely cried, we often had to figure out whether she was hungry, needed a bath, or simply wanted to be cuddled. Even before I started working at the law firm, I would go to the library, print letters of the alphabet, and pin them to the wall of the one room we lived in. I would point them out to her long before she could even read. By the time she was 2 years old, she knew basic letters and numbers. She could spell not only her name, but her father's name, mine, and my mother's as well. I also made sure that if she ever got lost for some strange reason, she knew her address, date of birth, and my contact information. My baby was extremely observant, and I loved her dearly. Every payday, one of the first places I headed to was the bookstore to buy two little books for her. I had never bought her a doll, and she never seemed particularly interested in toys anyway. Fridays excited her because she knew mommy would come home with something new for her to read. My mother was also a proud member of our little book reading fan club. When I was at work, she would sit and read with my baby girl as long as possible. There were probably more books in our one little room than there was in the reading corner of the classroom my daughter had just timidly walked into. I made a mental note that I should donate some of ours to the school. And then, as I looked at my daughter's head, a little giggle escaped my lips. The morning light glistened off her almost bald head. At 3, she barely had any hair on her head. My intelligent, sweet baby had one single thin plait at the front of her lobe, and that morning it was adorned with the brightest red ribbon to match her red and white school uniform. But she was perfect to me. Towards the end of the summer holidays, I'd gone to register her for school, not for the current year, but for the next year. I attended that same basic school as a child, and as luck would have it, the same principal, Mrs. Granville, was still there. Mrs. Granville could hardly believe that I had a baby of my own. She remembered me as a little girl who had cried when my own mother brought me to school for the first time. She took one look at my daughter and told me she could not register babies under 2 years old. I laughed. She's 3, Mrs. Granville. Mrs. Granville then looked at me in surprise. 3! She was tiny for her age, and everybody assumed she was much younger than she actually was. But when Mrs. Granville handed her one of her pre-K books and realized that my daughter could read it without assistance, she turned to me and said, "Bring her in for September. This is a big woman." And so Here we are. Me, a crying, laughing mess. My daughter, a bundle of joy, completely fascinated by the possibility of more books to read, tiny furniture she could sit comfortably around, and other children her age to play with instead of having only my mother for company. Getting her registered for school had been easy. Paying for it was another story. I didn't even bother asking her father and expected her to start school that September. So I didn't have the luxury of an entire summer to prepare, and I know the father would not have been any help. I had only a few days and very limited finances, and I had asked my cousin if I could come back to her shop after leaving the office in the evenings to help her out and earn a few extra money. Mr. Thwaites had begun seeing constituents on Thursdays, and there was always a mountain of letters and other work waiting to be completed. So by the time I left the office and went to my cousin's shop to wash a few heads for extra cash, I was so tired at nights that I barely had the energy to shower when I got home. Sometimes exhaustion was taking its toll, and I kept telling myself that this was for the best. My daughter needed me. Even if her father wasn't helping, she still had me, and that would be enough for her. I had finally cleared all the back rent I owed the landlord, and things between us seems to be in a better place. But my mother's health was not improving, and that was another worry I carried with me every day. The week before school started, I was still short on school fees. So I went to negotiate a payment arrangement with the school, and they agreed to accept 50% upfront and allow me to pay the balance in increments. That solved one problem, but created a completely another. If I paid the deposit and bought my daughters the snack and supplies she needed for school, I wouldn't have enough money for transportation to work until my next salary came. So I decided I would walk. My daughter would have it any way possible. It meant dropping my daughter at school earlier than necessary and then walking the distance to work so I could arrive on time. Her first day was emotional, but apparently only for one of us. I cried. My daughter, she barely batted an eyelash. I told her that my mother would come to pick her up after school, and she said, "Okay, Mummy, you can leave now," and then shove her fingers back into her mouth. Leave? Just like that? I'd expected her to cry, grab onto me, and beg me not to go. Instead, there I was standing at the gate, wanting to cry my heart out while my child was perfectly content to get on with their new life. Eventually, Mrs. Granville, the principal, shooed me away, reminding me that nobody was going to pay me to stand at the school gate and cry. Eventually, though, I did leave because I needed to attend work. Later that evening, my mother told me that having my daughter at school allowed her to get some much needed rest during the day. But the walk up Elliston Road and back down to collect my daughter, especially under the 2 o'clock Jamaican sun, was becoming too much for her. And so I needed to make another arrangement. And instead of asking my daughter's father directly, I went to his aunt and asked her to intercede on my behalf because I didn't want an argument with him. Maybe she could convince him to pick up his daughter from school. And I thought that was a brilliant idea, especially bearing in mind that he didn't contribute in any way to her attending her first school. He didn't even attend walking her to school her first school morning. But I was sadly mistaken. Almost every evening when I came home, my mother had some complaints to report from him. He didn't like what my daughter had worn to school. He didn't approve of some things in her lunchbox. There was always something he believed I could have done differently or better. He was always critical of me as a mother. The complaints, however, were never accompanied by financial support. The exhausted side of me simply ignored him and pushed through. Lunchtime at my office became my reprieve. The conversations ranged from hilarious to serious. One minute we would be cackling over some foolishness that had happened on the road, and the next we would be discussing something we had heard on the news. The lunchroom was small, so not everyone could take lunch at the same time. Some people went at noon, others at 1. I didn't have a set time. I simply went whenever the workload allowed. And that was how I started dating again. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I would start dating someone at my work, much less during one of the most unstable periods of my life. Barely had a cent to my name. My 3-year-old daughter just started school. My mother was sick. I was exhausted. And I still had a crazy, no good baby daddy hovering around the edges of my life. Who would have thought I would complicate things even further by dating? Certainly not me. But this guy was respectful. And he was handsome. He had a slight lisp, loved football, and somehow, without me even realizing it, I started making sure our lunch breaks happened at the same time. When he noticed that I sometimes wasn't eating and insisted on paying my lunch a couple of times, I found that endearing. At first, I thought he simply wanted an excuse to chat me up. Then he asked me out. The realization that another man found me attractive made me almost giddy. My daughter's father had said so many nasty things about me over the years that I'd started to believe them somehow. I convinced myself that no other man would want me and that even he had only stayed with me out of pity. No, somebody else was looking at me differently. And if I'm truthful, life was draining me. I wanted something more. I wanted to matter. I'd also started attending political meetings again and had been voted in as the youth leader for my division. Between my growing involvement in politics and this new relationship, suddenly I had things to look forward to that had nothing to do with the problems waiting for me at home. Outside of my personal life, I could see myself growing professionally. I was Mr. Thwaites' secretary at the constituency office. That meant many people from the community had to speak to me before getting an appointment to see him. I understood the responsibility that came with that, and I took it extremely seriously. I was determined that people from my own community would never feel as though they didn't matter simply because they were in need. Everyone who came through that office was treated with respect, regardless of their appearance, circumstances, or approach. I'd watch Mr. Thwaites closely and try to extend the same grace I saw him give people, sometimes even more, and even when they were rude or outrageous. I was learning how to communicate effectively with people in government and non government organizations. There were times when I had to interact with places like the Office of the Prime Minister, Food for the Poor, or various government ministries on behalf of my boss. Those interactions taught me confidence. They taught me how to negotiate. They taught me how to speak to people I once would have been intimidated to even approach. You see, Mr. Thwaites was a stickler for details. He could spot bullshit from a mile away and he knew how to read a room. Without him even knowing it, I was studying him. In my capacity as the youth representative for my division, I was also attending meetings at our party headquarters and learning more about the People's National Party. Not simply as someone who had grown up around politics, but as someone beginning to understand how the machinery actually worked. The going wasn't easy. My salary was only a little bit above minimum wage. There were times when I gave part of that already small salary to people who came into the office with basic needs. Other nights, I attended meeting at our party headquarters and I had to take the bus or walk at all hours of the night to reach home. Sometimes I would ask myself and God if there was a purpose to all of this. There had to be, because juggling everything was hard. Still, I kept going. From time to time, I also had opportunities to take short courses, either paid for by the law firm or offered through the political party. I absorbed whatever knowledge I could. By the time year three rolled around, I'd completely forgotten about my plans to enter the police force. My life had moved in another direction. I was focused on expanding my capabilities and discovering how much more I could become. One experience during that period, however, shook me deeply. I came face to face with the driver of the previous member of parliament. This time, I was on the other side of the fence. That driver lived in the same constituency, although not in my specific community. And one day he came into the office asking for an appointment to speak with Mr. Thwaites. The moment I saw him, anger surged through me. You remember the night when your boss almost ripped me off? I asked him pointedly. I stared at him, fighting the urge to reach across the space between us and wrap my hands around his neck. Yeah, man, he answered. I froze. My eyes widened. You're lucky said Tony saved you, you know. Me never know say that was the plan when him send me for you. He continued, as though explaining himself, as though separating himself from what was almost to happen. He had forgotten that he drove me to the destination. And I didn't believe a word he said. Part of me wanted to run outside and scream to the heavens. Instead, I did my job. I wrote his name and telephone number in the logbook and told him when to return to see Mr. Thwaites. But his admission ran like a bell inside my head. I couldn't shake it. The next morning, when I walked into the office, the man I'd been dating took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. He didn't have to push very hard before I told him everything. And it felt good to finally let it out and tell someone else other than my cousin. He hugged me, comforted me. Then he suggested we take a weekend trip out of town. He said it would help me to release some of the stress that I'd been going through. A weekend trip with a man? I'd never done anything like that before. My baby daddy had never even taken me to the movies. He had been so deeply embroiled in his gang activities that he rarely left our community unless he was traveling by taxi to and from wherever he needed to go. This was different. Going to the movies with someone who liked me was different. Dinner was different. And now, the possibility of spending a weekend in the country with someone who seemed to genuinely enjoy my company felt almost unimaginable. But nice. I agreed, and we made plans for the following week. Almost immediately, excitement gave way to apprehension. How would I explain this to my mother? What if my crazy baby daddy found out? Who would check on mommy and my daughter if something went wrong? What if Mr. Thwaites found out? And could I be fired for an office romance? And finally, where exactly could this relationship even go? There was no way I could invite this man into my community, much less my yard. Doing that would put him in danger because of my baby daddy and his gang connections. I'd thought about it the entire weekend, and by the end of the weekend, I was almost ready to call the old thing off. But there was another feeling underneath all of that fear. I wanted to live, just a little. I wanted 2 days when I wasn't someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's secretary, youth representative, and even someone's problem solver. 2 days when I didn't have to worry about school fees, bus fare, rent, my mother's health, politics, constituents, my baby daddy, or where there would be enough money left over after payday. I wanted just 2 days to feel free. And that was when I realized that my decision to go away with him had very little to do about intimacy. I wasn't looking for a man to save me. I was looking for 2 days when I didn't have to save everybody else. As we careened through the winding curves of Fern Gully, I was almost poking my face out the window of the bus taking us to Ocho Rios. Oh my God, we were on our way, I thought. If heaven had a smell, the scent of Ocho Rios would definitely be it. Clean, fresh, alive. The foliage along Fern Gully looked like the exact replica of the Garden of Eden. And as I felt his arm snake around my shoulder, a nervous giggle threatened to escape my lips. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, I thought salaciously. Every time I thought about what might happen between us that weekend, I became nervous. I'd only ever been with one man. I was still young and inexperienced, and if I was being truthful, I felt as though I was deceiving this new man just a little bit. Because I wasn't nearly as excited about being with him as I was simply about being away. Away from the bills, away from the worrying, away from the politics, away from crazy baby daddy, away from being responsible for everybody and everything. I probably would have been just as happy if I'd gone to Ocho Rios alone. Looking back at everything I'd been through over the previous few years made me feel a little bit sorry for myself. There was no way I could have afforded to book a hotel for an entire weekend. I would have considered myself mad to even attempt it, knowing how tight money was at home. And then him stepping up and footing the bill made the trip possible. And I probably seem a little naive with my obvious excitement. There were so many emotions swirling around inside of me, but the strongest one was pure happiness. Then I could hear my cousin's voice inside my head. She had given me two bathing suits she had never worn before, sending me along my way with a warning. Mind you go breathe again in her Ann. Well, that sobered me up immediately because there was no way I was having another baby. None. So he and I had an adult conversation about contraception and protection before anything happened. I was firm about it. I told him plainly that if he didn't respect what we had discussed, I would leave the hotel room immediately. That was that. I had already experienced enough madness with my daughter's father. I would not willingly walk into that again. Ochariah seeped into my veins, brought out another woman in me. I felt carefree, young again. The beaches, the air, the food, even the sun felt different, as though the solar system had given the parish its own private ball of fire in the sky. And he was good company. But if I'm truthful, that weekend wasn't really about him. It was about me. It was about remembering that underneath all those responsibilities, I was still a young woman who was allowed to laugh, swim, eat good food, sleep without worrying, and enjoy being alive. Sunday came far too quickly. The moment checkout arrived, my euphoria began to disappear. The only thing that lifted my mood was knowing that I was going home to see my mother and daughter after being away from them for an entire weekend. When I get back to Kingston, I decided to take a taxi from downtown and have it drop me directly at my gate. My plan was to make a mad dash into the yard and hope my baby daddy didn't see me. The fact that I even had to think like that irritated my spirits deeply. We hadn't been together since I was pregnant with my daughter. So why was I bounded to this man in this way? I'd seen him around the community with another young girl, way younger than I was. And I was actually happy that he appeared to be seeing other people. Although dating young women that age was extremely questionable for an adult man. I thought maybe it meant he was finally allowed to leave me alone. Was allowed a good phrase there? Well, whatever it is, I thought he would leave me alone, but it didn't. It didn't allow him to leave me alone. Every now and then, he still found an opportunity to hiss some kind of disrespect in my direction. differently. Moving on with his own life did not mean allowing me to move on with mine. Life returned to its usual rhythm: work, politics, community, school, mommy, but not necessarily in that order. The new man and I returned to Ocho Rios two more times before I discovered that he was seeing someone else. Oh? Well, I'd booked an appointment with my doctor to sort out some issues with my birth control. During the initial discussion, I mentioned a few things I'd noticed that was happening with my body. My doctor recommended immediate testing, and then he gently explained that I had an infection that appeared to have been sexually transmitted. You can imagine how dumbfounded I was. After our first trip to Ocho Rios, this man and I agreed that we were dating exclusively. I had started taking the pill, and it had become our only form of contraception because I believe we were committed to each other. I had trusted him. When I confronted him about what the doctor told me, he admitted that he had slept with someone else, and I saw red. The deceit. This could have been something far worse than an infection that could be treated. This could have been HIV/AIDS. Before we ever made a decision to stop using condom, we had spoken frankly about sexual health, exclusivity, and trust. I had been explicit about my body and the trust I was placing in his hand. After my experience with my daughter, I was very strict about this, and he had abused it. Just another man playing with my trust, I thought. I'd asked my doctor for a full panel of blood tests and immediately ended our relationship. There was nothing to discuss, no second chance, no explanation that could undo what he had done. I was finished. The difficult part was I still had to work in the same office with him. He had seemed so quiet, so soft spoken, so respectable, the complete opposite of my daughter's father, yet somehow I ended up with the same feeling: betrayed. The final nail in the coffin came when one of my coworkers casually asked me if I had seen the pictures of his son. Son? My eyes nearly fell out of my head. Yes, my dear, him sunburn last week. This was not even 2 weeks after we had broken up. I stared at her. Well, that was certainly the end of that. At least, I'm not the one having a baby, I thought. If nothing else, the experience taught me one lesson the hardest way possible. Never play where you work or work where you play, as the saying goes. And as my involvement in my community and politics continued to grow, I added a few more rules for good measure. I had made my own rules. No more men from my workplace, no more men from my community, and definitely no man from my political party. For the moment, romance could wait. I had a daughter to raise, a mother to worry about, and a political world opening in front of me that I was only beginning to understand. And the deeper I stepped into that world, the more I realized that knowing how to do the work wasn't going to be enough. Most of the rooms I was entering in were filled with men. Men with louder voices, men with bigger egos and years of experience peeking over women like me. I had spent the last few years learning how to survive men. I was about to learn how to stand among them. Thank you for listening to Chapter 3 in my audiobook, A Journey from Jamaica to Becoming. If you haven't done so yet, please remember to subscribe to my channel, turn on that post notification bell so you are notified next week when Chapter 4 is out. Leave a comment under this video. Tell me what you like, what you think will happen in Chapter 4, what you didn't like. I'm open to suggestions. Please share it with your friends if you haven't done so yet. Have a wonderful day. Until I see you in the next one.